On the road to recovery, which apartment markets are already there and which have a long way to go? Welcome to Apartment Market Dynamics from MPF Research. I'm Jay Parsons, and I'm joined today with Greg Willett, the Vice President for Research and Analysis with MPF Research. And the topic of the day is revenue change, which is the combination of same-store rent change and occupancy change. And back in 2008 and parts of 2009, revenues really took a dip during the recession. In 2010, we're now seeing recovery. So we want to take a look today at which apartment markets are already back into recovery mode or made some progress, and which are still struggling. And Greg, first of all, for the U.S. as a whole, where do we stand for revenue change between late 2007, prior to the recession starting, and 3Q 2010?
As you said, Jay, it has been a really good year so far this year. We've seen occupancy come up about 2.1 points. Rents are up on an effective basis 2.6%. So we've got, in total there, about 4.7% revenue growth. That still leaves about 3% to make up for the dip that occurred in 2008, 2009, which for the country as a whole was right at 7.7%. But obviously, lots of variation by metro.
And let's take a look at our first group here. Here's our top performing group with metros that have seen a revenue growth of more than 5% since prior to the recession. You see El Paso topping the list at 16.4%, an incredible increase in Greg's favorite market of El Paso. And that is followed by Baltimore, D.C., Pittsburgh, Oklahoma City, and Albuquerque, all with revenues up 5 to 8% since late 2007. Greg, looking at this list, what jumps out to you?
All these markets are ones that have done really well so far this year, but what really separates them from the pack across the rest of the nation is they didn't really struggle that much during the downturn. El Paso actually grew throughout that time frame, and for the rest of them, revenues essentially flatlined in 2008, 2009 versus the big hits that were seen elsewhere.
And let's take a look at Group 2. These are the markets that have seen revenues begin to increase since 2007, but not to levels of that first group. You see Columbus at the top of this list, revenues up 3% since late 2007, followed by Boston, Nashville, Chicago, Denver, and Miami. Greg, these are our fast recoverers. What do you think of this group?
By and large, they are the markets that we expected to be the first ones to come back, so not a lot of big surprises. One that does stand out, a little bit of a surprise to us, is Chicago. What we're seeing is some really significant rent growth over the past couple of quarters, and maybe, in fact, it's getting a little bit ahead of where they are on the occupancy numbers. So if there's one that's going to fizzle out in the recovery, I think that maybe Chicago would be the one to watch there.
And one more list for you. Let's take a look at the losers since 2007. We call this the deep hole markets. Revenue losses in 2008 and 2009 were enormous, and we've only seen modest improvement in 2010 that still leaves revenues down more than 10%, or roughly 10% or more under 2007 rates. Now, no one's going to be surprised to see Las Vegas at the bottom of this list, revenues down 19%, and also deep losses in Phoenix, Tucson, LA, Atlanta, and Riverside. Greg, your thoughts?
The usual suspects for this list, and what those markets really share in common are they are housing bubble markets where the housing bubble burst. Given that general theme, I think maybe the surprise there is you don't see any Florida markets on that list. So we have started the comeback in Florida. The worst performers in the Sunshine State, Tampa and Jacksonville, revenues still about 5% below where they were in 2007, but still not nearly bad enough to be on that worst of the worst list.
Sure. And Greg, one last question for you. We see about a dozen markets that are already posting positive revenue growth since late 2007. What's the next group? What do you anticipate the next list of metros to go into positive revenue change?
There are several markets that are right at that cutoff point, just slightly negative at this point. Standouts would be areas like Minneapolis, Philadelphia, San Antonio, Fort Lauderdale. I think by the end of the year, we'll in fact see those in positive territory also.
Thank you, Greg. And that wraps us up for today's episode of Apartment Market Dynamics. So until next time, for Greg Willett and MPF Research, I'm Jay Parsons. Thank you for watching.
Want more? Go deeper with NPF Research's apartment market reports. From a national level, down to individual metros, to specific neighborhoods, NPF Research has been providing unparalleled apartment market intelligence to the multifamily industry for almost 5 decades. Learn more by contacting us at 877-284-4938 or visit www.npfresearch.com and click on Market Reports.